Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast, where we're about to answer a controversial question. Do the Knicks actually need Julius Randle?
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Our Locked On Knicks, and this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. If you want to join the elite ranks of being an everydayer, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell on YouTube to ensure you never miss an episode there. And then be sure to do the same on your favorite podcast platform of choice. Just hit that auto download function to enjoy this podcast in your ears. That sounded dirty even to me. I'm Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster today. I'm joined by my buddy XJ, who does work over at Knicks Film School and with the Hot Hand Theory podcast. And we are going to answer some lingering questions that we have about the Knicks. And I think just kind of stuff that we want answers to in the playoffs this year. The biggest of those questions, to what extent do the Knicks need Julius Randle? And to what extent is an OG Anunoby, Jalen Brunson core with shooting around those two potentially the future of this team? We'll get into all that and more right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, we are lucky enough to be joined by XJ, the co-host of the Hot Hand Theory, where they cover the Knicks and the NBA as a whole, and a fantastic contributor over at our favorite competitor, Knicks Film School. XJ, welcome in, buddy. I'm sorry for the quick return. I always try to give people, I'm going to give them 2 months off whenever they come on. But you know what? I needed someone tonight. I called you, and you said, you know what? I'm down. Let's get into it. I'm really excited about it because I loved talking to you last time.
Oh, yeah, Gavin, I was just so sad that I had to come on and talk Knicks basketball with you tonight for, a fun 30 minutes. It was brutal. I was like, oh, no. No, I'm always super happy to join on late notice or long notice. Either way, I'm happy to jump on and talk hoops with you.
All right, awesome. I'll always keep that in mind when I need someone. But I thought this was a good topic for you because it's a little bit of a brain buster. Or maybe we'll see. I was kind of thinking back to last year a little bit and like a similar time. And I think I was coming on this pod and saying a lot of this playoffs is going to be an information gathering exercise for the Knicks. But I don't think at that point I had any high expectations of them getting out of the first round, or I thought they had a chance, but that wasn't really my goal. I was like, all right, what can we find out? And the questions I was asking were, all right, is Brunson capable of maybe being a number 2 on a title team? We found out maybe even more than that. Maybe he's a 1B or a 1A on a title team. Could Julius translate his regular season production to the playoffs? The answer was no, but he was hurt, so we don't really know. How would the young guys hold up outside of Quentin Grimes' defense and RJ Barrett showing some playmaking flashes? Not super great. With the offense as a whole, that was third in the NBA, sustain. It didn't really, but the defense was shockingly good, so that was amazing. And then I kind of got to thinking, all right, what's assuming the Knicks aren't going to make a finals run, which who knows, they still could. There's some evidence that they can put some of the best lineups in the NBA out there, so you don't want to totally rule it out. But I'm getting more and more nervous about us ever seeing a healthy Julius Randle this year by the day. So the next step, I'm all right, what can we learn from this season? And to me, I think the conclusion I came to, and I'll leave this off to you because I want to see how interested you are in it relative to me, is what do the Jalen Brunson and OG Anunoby lineups look like over more minutes, over a larger sample size, which means the same thing as more minutes. I just forgot what I was going to say. And how do they play without Julius Randle? And is there a world where even if you have there's no world where you have more talent without Julius Randle, but even if you have less talent, just putting 4 out around Jalen Brunson with a top 3 to 4 defender in the NBA is kind of the best case scenario for how the Knicks should be built, hopefully with more talent, but that should be the framework. What do you think about that as kind of a big thing the Knicks need to find out the rest of the way?
Yeah, I think when you said you thought that this would be a good topic for me, you didn't realize how good a topic this is for me. This is my topic. I love this topic. I totally agree. I think that the framing that you just gave is so great in terms of what can we learn about this team and using the kind of the next however many games until we see a Julius Randle. If we see a Julius Randle, what can we pull away from that time? And to me, it is kind of the Brunson dynamic with with spacers around him and kind of seeing how that can work and what are the most effective ways that you can set Brunson up for success without another primary initiator next to him in someone like Julius Randle. And to me, you know, my ethos, my thesis for the game of basketball is all around spacing. I love spacing. I think that the shooting that you get or the spacing that you get from shooting is just one kind of spacing. So I want to acknowledge that. So basically, I would call shooting gravity. I call it passive spacing because it's when the threat of a shot creates space without the player having to like actually do anything. Like they're not doing anything other than existing on the court, and that creates spacing. And this is opposed to other things I would call like active spacing. So the threat of you getting the ball and with a head of steam, or the gravity that can be created through like off-ball actions, that is more like active spacing. You're doing something that causes the other team to pay attention to you, and you're not creating that space just by like your existence. But I don't think all spacing is created equally. I think passive spacing is more valuable, and that's because it's not contingent on anything. It always exists, and it influences every play, and you don't have to be doing something specific to create that value. And OG Anunoby embodies the value of passive spacing. There were so many plays in the most recent game against the Sixers where OG was just there and his existence allowed the play to even be possible. It was incredible. Like if you just watch back that game and just watch the way that the Sixers defended OG Anunoby and just watch whoever was guarding him, it would show you all of the avenues and lanes that he opened up, not only for Jalen Brunson, but also for Josh Hart. So the one thing I want to say about the game, at least a couple plays I remember. One play was like early in the game, Hartenstein got a dunk on a high pick and roll with Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt you for 1 second. This is exactly what I talked about on the pod last night. But yeah, go ahead.
He got a dunk on a high pick and roll with Jalen Brunson, and it would not have been possible without OG spacing. They put Josh Hart in the strong side corner. They put OG in the weak side corner and Dante on the wing. And that meant that no one on the strong side could possibly help that pick and roll. If it was someone like Precious or someone else there, even Julius Randle, teams could obviously potentially help off of him on the weak side corner, which would have completely killed that play. But because it was OG Anunoby, who shoots 49% from three from the left corner, you could not possibly help off of him, which created an obvious easy dunk. There were many Josh Hart cuts into wide open space that were created just because of Anunoby's existence on the court. I think it brings a dynamic to the court that is different from Julius Randle, of course, who brings a completely different positive value to the offensive end of the court. But it's a dynamic that I think works really well for the team. And then we haven't even talked about OG's defense yet. But I want to stop there just because I could go on about this for a really long time. I just want to get your thoughts to what I just said.
No, I'm in total agreement. I mean, that's kind of what that was my takeaway from the Sixers game as well. I mean, it was the other Hartenstein short roll play. Like they kind of learned their lesson from their dunk and they said, all right, we're going to I can't say that word. Screw it. We're going to help off Josh Hart. And Josh Hart had a three where he literally had 9 seconds to shoot it and he missed it. It went in and out, but that's like the way Josh Hart has been shooting recently. That's a great shot. And like, maybe we'll talk about later, like whether we expect Josh to take and make that shot in the playoffs and how that is kind of a backbreaker for the Knicks. And if they're going to truly be 4 out, like he has to be at least an average shooter and be willing to shoot, I think, more than anything else. So that's something to watch come playoff time. But it did almost remind me of like a lesser version of those great Warriors teams, like when they had Kevin Durant, and like obviously like that's like it's different when you're guarding a pick and roll with prime Steph Curry versus like the current version of Jalen Brunson as good as he is. It's different when Kevin Durant's in the corner versus OG Anunoby. But you would see JaVale McGee like in the NBA Finals like look like Anthony Davis like rolling to the rim and getting dunk after dunk after dunk. It was like, all right, well, we got to give that up because if not, it's an open three for KD or it's an open three for Steph or it's an open three for Clay. And the Knicks are finding a low level version of that. And the beauty of like not just having that space, because we saw last year the Knicks could occasionally get to those types of lineups, especially like in games where Obi was really hitting threes. You have kind of the ultimate defender on the other end of the floor to ensure like, all right, we're not the Pacers and we're not playing 142 to 139 basketball. Like we can score a lot doing that. And we can supplement it the other way. So I wanted to delve into your world and put some numbers to this. So I pulled it up, a very, very complicated advanced statistic there. The Brunson and OG Anunoby net rating with no Julius Randle. 197 possessions so far. So that is a relatively small sample size. They are plus 46.5 over that stretch. Now, that's not to say that they've been bad with all three of them on the floor. They have a plus 26.1 net rating with all three of them over a much better sample size of 582 possessions. But I think what I'm getting at here is the idea that, like, all right, like, is there a world where they're somehow even better? And the thing is, even if they're not actually better with this lineup, just the fact that they're not substantially worse, which maybe still has to be proven out over time. It still has to be proven out in the playoffs on how that can work. But like, if that's the case, it makes you question the value of Julius Randle on this team. And I hate to do that for a guy who I think after just about the worst first 6 games that you could expect, like probably played the best basketball of his career for someone who made 2 All-NBA teams this year and like was an absolute warrior for this team, maybe not on defense, but on offense. So this isn't to crap on Julius Randle. It's more so to say, like, is there a better allocation of resources? And I think everyone's kind of on the same page. Like, all right, if the Knicks could get, like, I'm just throwing out a name here, it's a little past his prime, but like a Paul George type wing, or of course they could get Joel Embiid instead of Julius Randle. Yeah, that's obvious. But like, are they maybe even better, like getting like just like a good wing who could shoot the ball, which I think we were talking about a little bit when Harrison Barnes seemed like he was an option for Randle a year ago. But I'm wondering what you think about that, and just how, like, not obviously the Knicks are not lucky that Julius Randle is hurt, but how that is kind of the silver lining. Like with the Celtics fight, we're talking silver lining. So that's a silver lining of the Randle injury, that we can get some time with this. Guys, we're going to be back with XJ in just a sec to continue getting his take on whether Julius Randle is the right member of the big three for the New York Knicks, or if they could actually benefit from someone who shoots the ball a little bit better. But first, I got to tell you guys about Prize Picks. What is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. We're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. On so many other DFS games, you have to beat people who are in their parents' basement and they're pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars in, and they have thousands of entries, and they know how to do math, and you're just not going to beat those people. The beauty of Prize Picks is you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So you don't have to worry about those people. Plus, it's now demon time on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
It's absolutely a silver lining, although I will say I think Julius Randle is an amazing player. I believe he's earned, his multi-time All-NBA All-Star status. I think he's great. At the same time, I do think there's a lot to what you were just saying. And I would say that the Cleveland Cavaliers situation is one that I think that all Knicks fans should have been paying close attention to. And the Cavs are something that my podcast partner from Hot Hand Theory, Jeff, and I like to call a clone team. So we call them a clone team because we typically, we have asked the question on Hot Hand Theory, would you rather have a second OG Anunoby, a clone of OG Anunoby, or Julius Randle? So before I talk more about that, what would you choose, Gavin? I'm going to put you right on the spot with no time to think about it.
Sure. I'm going to pretty easily take the clone, given that they might be better with one OG. And like, I guess Josh Hart is the second OG for now, or DiVincenzo is the second OG. And like, as much as I like those guys, I'd take OG over either of them. So I'll go double OG.
So I totally agree. Jeff and I both agreed with you. Yeah. And the reason is because OG is not redundant with anything that Brunson does. He's completely additive. Shooting is the ultimate additive skill on offense. You don't take away from anyone else's best skill by shooting well. And then almost all of defense is additive. But if you're excellent on ball and off ball, like OG Anunoby is, you add the most value there. That's literally OG Anunoby, one of the most additive players in the game of basketball. On the other hand, with Julius Randle, to get the best out of him, to maximize his value, you need to have the ball in his hands a fair amount. And if he has the ball, guess who doesn't? Brunson. And in my opinion, I generally would almost always rather Brunson have the ball in his hands than Randle. Randle doesn't confer as much value off ball as OG because of the difference in spot up shooting, but he does command a lot of gravity. So I don't want to underestimate that. You can't just leave Randle wide open and just give him a head of steam coming to the basket. Like, no one wants that. So he still has gravity, but it's just not the same as a player who can completely dash you and gash you basically from the 3-point line if you leave him wide open. And so to me, Randle obviously would never approach the value that OG provides defensively. And so short story is OG gets to be his optimal self at all times while only enhancing his teammates. While for Randle to be his optimum self, he needs to sort of pull away from his teammates to an extent. So that's the big difference there. And so I'm really glad that we get this kind of case study, whether it's a small sample, 10, 15 games, to kind of see what the team looks like without a Julius Randle. And that will say, hey, we need Julius Randle back. We need a guy like Julius Randle, or maybe we just need a guy more like OG Anunoby to go along with OG Anunoby. So to me, that's the big experiment that we're looking at moving forward.
Yeah, I think what's going to be so fascinating is to see how it carries over in the playoffs and whether that means obviously we all hope Randle's playing in the playoffs. And I think maybe you wouldn't. I would say for this year, there's not a world where they're not a better team with Randle just because of his ability to prop up the non-Brunson minutes more than anything else. But it does get into some interesting territory of how you think about basketball and how you think about playoff basketball in particular. And obviously the old adage is all right, it slows down, it grinds out. You need guys who can just go and get buckets, but it's also easier to get buckets with a well-spaced floor. And we saw last night, Josh Hart's been incredible this whole stretch, but how much easier did it look for Josh Hart? And you were noting that before. And I was saying with those 10 assists, so many of them were hockey assists for Jalen, where Jalen could draw to dish it off to him. And because of OG being on the floor, those rotations get 10 steps longer, and you're not having the stretches anymore where Hart could make an incredible play, could make an incredible pass, but it ends with a kick to Precious Achiuwa in the corner. And he's either missing a three or just dribbling into a crowd. And with Julius Randle, obviously he's a better play finisher than Precious, and there's more going on there, but you do get a little bit of that, and you lose some of the beautiful game we saw yesterday, which they looked like those old Spursgasm videos that you'd watch for hour, at least I would, coming out of high school in 2013 with the really cool music on them, and just oh wait, Brunson, he's the star, but he's doing a back cut and he's either finishing or he's throwing out to OG, and then OG's driving and getting a dunk off it, but it was because of how the defense was tilted. But I'm getting sidetracked here. Point being, does this actually work in the playoffs, or is there just not quite enough shot creation? And I think that's a little bit of an unfair question, because maybe where you finish this is all right, in a world where they actually move off of, we're not saying they're better without Randle. They're saying they might be better with someone different than Randle who makes about the same money and has a different skill set. Again, someone like Paul George, I'm just thinking of malleable two-way wings who can shoot and self-create, I think is the key thing. So you get the best of Julius Randle, but without the spacing detriments. And I do think there would be series and defenses where the offense would bog down, but I also wonder to what extent that ultimately matters, because we saw this team give the Heat a decent run for their money without the spacing, essentially without Julius Randle and without the defender that OG Anunoby is. I'm is there a version of basically that team that is just dramatically better with OG in there? And is that a conference finals team?
It's a great question. And I love that you keep pointing to Paul George, because Paul George is the prototype for this role for me. I think you said it so well. You get a lot of the benefits of having a Julius Randle and a lot of the benefits of having a guy that's not like Julius Randle, but a guy who can be off ball, who can spot up, who can hit threes. It's just an amazing fit.
Spacing, right? He gives you that.
Exactly. He gives you that passive spacing on top of being able to initiate and create when Brunson's not on the floor, or when Brunson needs a breather, or when Brunson's getting double teamed. You don't really want to give it to Paul George and say, here, you can take on our defense 4-on-3. That's really not a situation that you want. So he's the guy. If Paul George was 3 years younger, I would say give up the house for Paul George. Whatever they need to get Paul George, you give it up. I don't care. His age just makes it such that you essentially have a 1 to 2 year window to win a championship. And that just makes me feel uncomfortable, but maybe that's an emotional stance. At the same time, I think you're totally right. In terms of moving forward into the playoffs, I want to be really clear here. I agree with you. I'm not saying that the Knicks have a better chance of going deeper into the playoffs without Julius Randle. It's just, what would a Julius Randle replacement look like if we were to get one? Or is Julius Randle the guy to actually be here and is the right fit for what they're trying to accomplish and would let them get deepest into the playoffs? And I don't know. I really believe that it's more of the former. I do think that there's probably a better fit of a Paul George type, but I don't really know who that other player is. So it's really hard for me to say specifically who that guy is.
Yeah, I can't say, maybe this is bad podcasting by me, but like I don't really have an obvious answer to that question in terms of someone who's like realistically going to be available and is like young and in their prime. Like the name that I've come back to a lot in terms of like, all right, like who's my best case scenario? And this is on a team like with Julius, but maybe if they traded Julius for him, or if they traded Julius for like other assets and more depth, like someone like Mikal Bridges is not quite that, just because he, like, outside of the half season in Brooklyn, like he's just not the, like we're seeing it over a much larger sample. I've said sample size 50 times this podcast. I'm gonna cut myself off. But just because I have a data guy on does not excuse that. Yeah, Mikal Bridges, like he gets you part of the way there, and like I wonder if, like, because I think what we're getting at without saying, or at least like I'll speak for myself, what I'm getting at without saying is like, I don't know if I buy that Hart and DiVincenzo can do quite what we've seen them do at their peaks. And DiVincenzo, that was that stretch right before the All-Star break. Josh Hart, it's these last 10 games, like in the playoffs. And I think, because we just haven't seen it. And like, and Hart was the guy who took maybe the biggest hit relative to regular season production of anyone on the team in the playoffs. And DiVincenzo historically has not been very good in the playoffs. And for him to do 70% of what he did in that stretch when he was putting up 27 a game, like that's a win for the Knicks. Like on his contract, that is a massive, massive win, but it just feels like they need to be a little bit more insulated against that. And that is kind of always the concern with a Tom Thibodeau team, maybe fair or unfair, like that what you see in the regular season is the team already maxed out. And in a lot of ways that's a credit to him, but it also means you have to keep things in perspective relative to the playoffs. But Bridges, just in terms of a lengthy wing who takes nothing away defensively, who gives you that spacing and has like a tad of that creation, is there. And then there's a reason like that the Knicks have been searching for that guy and not finding that guy for the last 20 years. Like they just do not grow on trees. And like, even if you're willing to give up the house, like it has to be right place, right time, to your point, to not only find that guy, but find that guy relatively in his prime. So it's a very tricky thing. Do you have any final thoughts on that? Or do you want to skip to like some other things we want to see in the playoffs, or questions we want answered in the playoffs? All right, guys, we're going to wrap this one up answering some other big questions we want answered in the playoffs. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on a 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker dealer.
No, the last thing I would just say about Josh Hart specifically is he's just such a unique type of player. I think is the funny thing about Josh Hart is that, he doesn't really fit any mold or archetype that I can think of. There aren't players like Josh Hart. Something that we saw in the recent Sixers game is Josh Hart getting a rebound, a defensive rebound, and pushing it up the court. Just when he grabs it and goes, it's awesome. Like they got so many open shots just from Josh Hart pushing in transition. And I think that's like an underrated benefit of having Josh Hart and OG Anunoby play together is that Josh Hart is going to get those rebounds a lot of times. Whereas when Julius plays with Josh Hart, Julius is getting the rebound because Josh Hart is going to move out of the way and let Julius get his boards. Josh Hart is getting that rebound, and there's an advantage there because he's going to grab it. He's going to go. And you get those semi-transition opportunities, and you get really high percentage looks for Brunson, for DiVincenzo. You're going to want that at all times. So Josh Hart is he just brings a strange, and I mean this in the most complimentary way, like a strange dynamic to the team that I think that there's no real replacement for. I don't know if it's always the best thing. I feel like with the right other pieces, it's great. So if there's a lot of spacing around Josh Hart and he's the one who is kind of given the shot, a lot of times he can use that space to get offensive rebounds, to cut into space, all of those kinds of things. So he just brings a different dynamic. But yeah, I think maybe I could bring up something that I want to learn from the playoffs And one is really just how efficient can this team get in the half court? Because I was just talking about transition, and currently per clean the glass, they're 18th in the league in half court efficiency on a points per play basis. But of course, that includes like all the iterations of this team, all the various iterations.
It's so hard to look at any season stats because it's like, right, which one's real, which one matters.
Exactly. Any season stats, like who knows what it is, but I do want to see how good they can be in terms of the efficiency of in the half court on their first shot. So not to be so reliant on offensive rebounds, but the offensive rebounds being more of a plus than that, like a necessary prerequisite to a positive offense for them. Because you mentioned it at the top of the show. We saw their third ranked offense, I think, last year going into the playoffs not be sustainable. And that's because they relied on the possession battle. They relied on the offensive rebounds for offensive effectiveness. And that's going to be tough to maintain in a 7-game series playoff environment where the opponent is fighting extremely hard for boards. They have this high level of focus and effort and physicality night in and night out that they don't bring to every regular season game. They're bringing that to the postseason. So it's going to be really difficult to just say, we're going to enforce our will on you and get offensive rebounds, and that's going to be the bedrock of our offense. There may be some teams who, just aren't able to up their level to that level of physicality, Cleveland, but, there aren't that many of them. So, unless you get the perfect matchup, you're going to have to score with some efficiency in the half court. And that's the thing that I want to see looking forward with this kind of, the OG Brunson kind of Hart lineups that we see with a center. That's the thing I want to see is, can they be really efficient in the half court, or are they still relying on getting offensive rebounds to bolster their offensive effectiveness?
Yeah, I think I still, and like, I can't always, I mean, other than the fact that they're just like great teams, like the idea of playing the Celtics, the Bucks, or the Heat, like still makes me a little nauseous, I think, particularly for that reason, because I just like, I think I was scarred from that Heat series last year. I just have this idea baked into my head, like, all right, whatever I'm seeing now, like it is just not going to be working the same way in the playoffs. And with the Celtics, I mean, we touched on it last time you were on. I mean, just their ability to hound the ball with White and Holiday is just ridiculous. And the fact that like seemingly post All-Star break, and this is like a big ongoing conversation, like the NBA is allowing a little bit more physicality, like that series makes me scared about what's going to happen to Brunson. The Bucks, even with Dame, obviously are just a little bit less fearsome on that end of the floor, but just the sheer size and physicality of Giannis, Lopez, and Portis is still like, I think maybe because the Bucks had the Knicks number for such a long time, and we haven't gotten to see what it looks like with OG yet. So maybe that shifts, because obviously that last game, the 5th game somehow was right before they got him. But that one's interesting. And then the Heat, like the old enemy, like a deeper version of them, and just the way, I mean, clearly the Knicks aren't quite as reliant on Mitch anymore, but the way Bam just sort of took Mitch out of that series is still like a big thing. And to your point, like when that happened in that series, like the Knicks just did not have a counterpunch. So I'm with you on that one. To me, like, my number one was going to be about Julius, and like, if he's relatively healthy, how does his play translate to the postseason? And that's still a big one. I just have no, like, I just think whatever, like if he's good, that's great. If he's bad, like there's just going to be another asterisk on it, which sucks because now that's 3 playoffs. Like the first one, like he gets a little bit of a mulligan because Elfrid Payton was starting next to him, and the rest of that line, like we look back on it now and you're like, oh my God, like that was so bad. It's amazing that they were the 4 seed. And then if he's good, like that's great, but I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith there. So I'm going to go to like a little bit more of a more controversial one. Are we sure Jalen Brunson is the guy that we saw against the Miami Heat? Because I just go back to that Cavs series, and I remember like kind of walking away like a little bit underwhelmed maybe. And obviously it's some good games, some good moments, but you go back and look at the stats and like they were pedestrian by his standards, even adjusting for the fact that the playoffs are harder than the regular season. And I think we all forgot about it because he went supernova against the Heat, and clearly like the lineups that the Knicks will have out there around him now will help him be better. But I just wonder, like, all right, is that really who he is, or did he get scalding hot for like 4 games?
Yeah, this is a really great point. And I believe that that's who Jalen Brunson is, I want to say, but I think you're totally right in bringing up the Cavs series and that making it feel a little bit of a concern. Honestly, my concern is that teams play, and it's funny because I'm kind of sitting here like, should I even say this? But it's silly. I don't think anybody any NBA teams are looking for me for advice on how to guard Jalen Brunson. I'm a little worried that teams start to play him the way that the Celtics played him, and this is something that I started to be a little fearful of. The last time you and I talked, it was after the Celtics game, and they just played a deep drop, and it was like at first it's like, you can't play a drop against Brunson. But then the more you think about it, and the more you see the results, it's kind of like, I would live with letting Brunson take like 25 to 30 shots a game, especially if most of them are from the mid-range. So I don't know if your offense is completely dependent on Brunson mid-range jumpers. I mean, he's extremely efficient from that range, but also like, how good is your offense really going to get? And then also he has to make all these shots. These are tough shots. There are only a couple guys, it's a handful of guys in the NBA who take the kind of shot diet that Jalen Brunson does and are as efficient as he is. Devin Booker being the primary one I think of, a guy who can just take all, have this 90s era style shot diet and be as efficient as a modern NBA player. But yeah, there aren't many guys who can do it. And so you have to kind of rely on that. And I'm a guy who believes in variance, especially when it comes to three-point shooting. You take a ton of threes. You expect to miss sometimes, but in the long haul, it's going to average out and you're going to shoot what you shoot. And maybe that's true for Brunson, but when we're talking about mid-range jumpers, I'm not sure that I'm willing to bank a series on that. So that is a concern for me as well. Although I do think Brunson is who he is, and I think he can get it done in the playoff situation. I am thinking that there are some ways that teams can guard him that we haven't seen them do so much that would cause the Knicks trouble.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because they're just so disproportionately reliant on it. And to your point, like variance evens out, but it evens out, I'm not going to say the word, over a full season. Like, does it even out over a 6-game series? Like, because if you have two games where Brunson doesn't hit those shots, like those are like, it's not that like, all right, well then you have to go to something else. It's that if Randle is anything less than 100%, like you're going to lose. Like if maybe not against the Cavs, but against the teams we just listed, like the Heat, Celtics, Bucks, you're going to lose. If they're leaning Brunson into those shots and he's not making those shots. I think the other slight concern that's maybe been a little bit under discussed, and maybe with good reason, this is entirely anecdotal. I can't say I've looked into the numbers on it, but like I thought earlier in the year, I was so encouraged when Brunson was just consistently launching and making like 25 to 30 footers. And that it feels like that's gone away a little bit, because to me, I thought that was the trump card. I was like, all right, if you're going to go into drop and then Tibbs can just say, all right, we're just going to set the screen close to half court, go into your drop. Like he's going to dribble into 24-foot-3 after 24-foot-3. But if Brunson isn't consistently willing to take and make that shot and can do it over a long stretch. And I just wonder if he can, because as strong as he is and as tough as he is, like he just seems a little obviously exhausted at this point. And it makes sense given the playoff run, then the World Cup, and then everything he's had to do this season. And that's where like this kind of brings the conversation full circle, like where you're really, really reliant on Randle. I have a bunch more of these, but I think we could probably save them for another day. Do you want to throw out one more, XJ, before we wrap up? If you have one more?
I mean, one quick one, because we're going through kind of quick hitters. One was just like, can their defensive rebounding hold up with OG Anunoby at the 4 next to Hart instead of Julius at the 4 next to OG? So obviously you're talking about a little bit of a size difference there. And, Julius, for all his warts, is a really good defensive rebounder. Defensive rebounding is a huge reason why the Knicks are currently the 8th ranked defense in the league. But similarly to their kind of MO on the offensive end, teams are able to score a little too efficiently, and their defense is focused on limiting teams to one shot, which is great. But like, I want to see if the defense can make teams less efficient while also holding them to one shot by securing the rebound. So that's a minor concern that I have looking into the, kind of peering into the playoffs. But yeah, it's just about defensive rebounding, and can we make teams less efficient on the defensive end and the defensive side of the court, and not just be relying on holding them to one shot, but letting them kind of score at a really high clip, which is kind of what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I guess the good indicator there is they've been like extraordinarily good with Hart and OG on the court together. I think maybe some of those minutes are with Randle, but I think the number last I checked, which was before last night's game, was something like 84 points per 100 possessions, which is unholy. And our buddy Jonathan Macri put out that the Knicks had the 4 best lineups in the NBA that have played at least 50 possessions, or 4 best 4-man lineups in the NBA, and Hart and OG were in all of those. But I hear your concern, and to me, like where my mind goes is like, all right, do we get a healthy Mitch? Do we get an healthy Hart? Do we get like one of them healthy? And if they're close to 100%, like I think they'll be okay there. And the one team that maybe gives you some pause is the Bucks, and like what they can do. Like, I don't even know if they're a crazy good offensive rebounding team, just with their size, and the idea of like someone like Hart having to box out Giannis consistently, like spooks me a little bit. And it just comes down to their center's health, which we can't really plan for. All right. So on that semi-pessimistic note, we'll wrap up this one. But there's a lot more on this bone, and maybe we'll bring you back XJ before the playoffs to talk about some more. But before I let you go, can you tell everyone where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, you can find me at, Knicks Film School, do a weekly podcast on there called Casual Friday with my partners Mensa and Sean with a W. And then also on Hot Hand Theory, it's my personal podcast with my buddy Jeff, all about looking at the game in kind of non-traditional ways, breaking things down from an analytical perspective. But yeah, you can catch me on there. Search Hot Hand Theory or search Knicks Film School on YouTube.
All right, guys, be sure to check it out and be sure to like and subscribe, because Mo's emphasized to me that that's very important. I don't totally understand the like part. I guess it promotes it. Anyways, he's XJ. I'm Gavin. We will talk to you very, very soon on Locked On Knicks, the Hot Hand Theory, and Casual Friday.